So, Voyage of the Dawn Treader is right in the middle of post-production, and a couple weeks ago, we got a pretty juicy quote from Michael Apted that caused a lot of discussion and controversy that I want to talk about. This was an interview in Empire magazine in Australia, and Michael Apted said, "This is a lot more psychological. It's not a big action movie. There are a lot of different locations and adventures, but apart from a huge battle at the end with a sea serpent and a dragon, this is a character story." Now, I think like a lot of fans, that's that middle part was what caught my reaction the most. Whereas a battle with a sea serpent and a dragon, my first reaction was, this is always what we're talking about. You know, we're always worried about them throwing in action scenes. You know, leave it to Hollywood to take a really character-driven, emotional adventure story and make it this special effects fest. You know, that was my first reaction. You know, because as Narnia fans, we're always really sensitive to that. Then I thought more about it and calmed down a little bit and said this could actually be a good thing. It just depends on what their intentions are. So I'm going to talk about that here. What this implies is that, first off, Eustace, now we're assuming that the dragon he's talking about is Eustace, which seems like a pretty reasonable assumption. I think we have to assume that until further evidence turns up. Why would it just be a random dragon? Let's assume it's Dragon Eustace attacking a sea serpent and saving the crew. That's going to take place near the end of the story. So that suggests something that, that's a change I've been suggesting for some time on Narnia Web. I can't remember if I've done it on these videos or not, so let me just say it again. I've been suggesting for a while, like they really should take Eustace's transformation into a dragon and move it to later in the story. And here's why. In the book, we get to know Eustace really well in a relatively short amount of time. Dragon Island's one of the first places they go to. We actually get to read Eustace's journal for a while, which is something that I don't think would really work in a movie. I mean, you could do it, but I just don't think it would work as well as in a book. In a book, it's just so seamless to be able to read that. And so we learn a lot about Eustace as a character very quickly. I think in a movie we need more time to get to know this self-centered jerk that Eustace is before he makes that transformation. For it to be as powerful of a transformation as it is in the book, we're going to need more time to show that visually. It's adaptation. Yeah, it works in the book, but how do you do that visually? So I think we would move Dragon Island to near the end of the story and give us more time to know Eustace, then he can go through that transformation. That would actually be more conventional. That would be a more conventional character arc where he's one way for most of the movie, and then towards the end he changes. That's what they tried to do with Peter. Actually, you know, he's in Prince Caspian. He was a jerk for most of the movie, then at the end he changed. That's just the typical way to do it. Now there were some things I didn't like about the Peter. Obviously, the way that was executed in Prince Caspian. Some areas worked, some didn't, but that's what they were going for. And conceptually, it was a good idea, even though it didn't completely work. He's a jerk for most of the movie, and then he changes at the end. Now, like I said, that's the more conventional approach, and on these videos I'm always saying, don't do the conventional thing, you know, let's do something different. Let me just make it clear here. I'm not saying never do the conventional thing. I'm saying do whatever works best for the story, and even if it's unconventional. This is the case where the conventional thing would work better, I think. So go ahead and make that change, move Eustace's transformation to near the end of the story, or later in the story at least. So this suggests that they've made that change, and I think that would be a good change. Then the other thing is, when Eustace is a dragon, I think some of the most beautiful pieces of writing in the entire series are when Lewis tells us what he's thinking, and now you can see him change as a character, not just a physical change. This is a very powerful character change for Eustace, and we get to see him walk through that, you know, by what's going on in his head. In his head, those are his thoughts, but you typically can't hear the character's thoughts in a movie. People do it sometimes, but it usually doesn't work very well. Not for this story, at least I don't think it would. So how do you express all that visually? All that beautiful writing of what's going on in Eustace's head in the book, how do you express that visually? Well, one possibility would be to have a scene where Eustace as a dragon saves the crew from a sea serpent. And what that would do is we would be able to see how Eustace, who was so selfish before, is now more humble and selfless. He puts his life on the line to save the crew. It could also bond the crew to him. They've hated him viewed him as a nuisance for most of this movie, and now that would bond them to him if he saves their lives. It would also make the audience start liking Eustace a little more. For most of the movie, we've been really annoyed by Eustace, as we should if they've done it right, and now we get to actually root for Eustace as an audience. You know, I mean, like if the sea serpent's attacking the Dawn Treader, it's probably going to be, if it is like it is in the book, all the lives of the characters on that ship are on the line. If we care about any of those characters, we're going to be rooting for Eustace. We're going to be, go Eustace, defeat the sea serpent, We get to actually root for Eustace, and so that's going to help win the audience over a little bit to how Eustace has changed. So if that's what this is, this is just a visual way of expressing what's in the book, and doing something that I think from a character point of view, or in terms of film, a more efficient way of showing Eustace's changes of character and doing his whole arc, which we went moving it near the end. Then I'm all for this. This does raise some questions, though. Of course, what does Apted actually mean when he says at the end? Does he actually mean the climax of the story, or does he mean just somewhere in the last third of the film? And I remember Apted spoke these words, and then they were transcribed, so something could have got lost in translation. And I've transcribed a lot of interviews for Narnia Web, and I know that sometimes it can be really difficult to. Yeah, they said it, and I understood what he meant when he said it, but now I've got to figure out how to make the meaning the same in text form. Sometimes that can be difficult. So be careful about taking this too literally. One of the big questions is, what does he mean by at the end? I mean, does this happen in the Silver Sea? The sea serpent pops up. I mean, it just seems like this should be an emotional climax, as it is in the book, not a big action climax. So I wouldn't want anything to be a distraction at all from Reaper Chief's emotional departure. It's such a tear-jerking scene for me in the book. Such an emotional scene. So this raises a lot of questions too. When does Eustace become a boy again? Where does he get undragoned, is the word we use, and the word I think Edmund uses that in the book. And this is a scene where Aslan removes Eustace's skin, and changes him back. Where would you have that scene in light of all this? That's one thing I don't really understand. So it's just like, again, we're back in the Prince Caspian days, where it's like it's clear they've changed the structure a little bit here. I'm sure not to the same extent as Prince Caspian, but it kind of limits our ability to speculate. Now, I can completely understand what a lot of the people in the forum are saying. That some people with the most negative views are just kind of thinking, well, gosh, the thing that makes this scene so memorable in the book is how they win by not fighting. There's one Narnia Weber who brought that up in one of the threads, and that's true. Like Eustace tries to use Caspian's sword in the book to defeat the sea serpent, and it doesn't work. It's a little bit of comedy there. And then Reaper Chief actually says, "Don't fight." Actually, it's interesting. Both Eustace and Reaper Chief behave uncharacteristically in this scene. I think it's interesting, but I really think the point of that scene in the book is to show Eustace how selfless he's become. It shows how he's doing something he never would have done before he became a dragon. Putting his life on the line, trying to defeat the sea serpent. I think that's the main point of that scene in the book, and you could essentially use that for the same purpose here in the movie. And this is what adaptation is all about. It works in the book. How do we make it work just as well in the movie? How do we take these things Lewis expressed in narration in the book and express that visually? Because that's what movie is. It's visual storytelling. And so those are kind of my thoughts on it right now. I mean, Apted says here, which was encouraging to read, this is not an action story, it's a character story, it's a very emotional story. Well, that's nice he says that, but I would like to see him put his money where his mouth is, and let's actually do this. Let's not try to throw in action scenes, a thing we're always really conscious of on our new web, of course. So 319 days to go, right in the middle of post-production, hoping to get the first footage. I've never followed a movie marketed by Fox before, so I'm not sure what to expect. But hopefully get like a poster, concept art, behind-the-scenes footage, maybe even actual footage from the movie sometime in the next few months. All right, you ready?
Hey, that'll do.